Fáilte, everyone, you are very, very welcome to this edition of Mind Your Precious Self. And this topic is very dear to my heart. It's older, wiser, and finer. And that says a lot about us women, and indeed our menfolk. But I'm sure you'll agree that if I asked you, would you like the body you had when you were a teenager? I imagine most of us would go, oh, yes. But my next question might flummox you. Would you like the mind you had when you were a teenager? And I think most of us would say, I don't think so. Because as teenagers, sure, look, our hormones were raging around. We were all over the place. We didn't know who we were or what we should be. And perhaps there was peer pressure and that not so much knowing ourselves. But as we age, in theory, we grow wiser and we have the experience of life to teach us all there is to know about the finer things in life. So while we might not have the bodies, those young, fresh, exuberant, full of energy bodies, we have a mind, we have feelings, we have the wise energy of life experience. Now, you might also agree with me when I say that in our modern world, and I'm talking about the last, say, 100 years or so, there has been very much an emphasis, a shift, if you will, towards youth in all its glory. Therefore, we try various ways to hold on to that youth valiantly. So maybe we're in the gym, or maybe we are freshening ourselves up, or we're doing something with our hair, we're dressing as we would when we were younger. However, would you be surprised to know that certainly in ancient Ireland and many indigenous cultures worldwide, they didn't take you seriously until you hit 70. Why? Well, for one thing, to survive to the age of 70 was no mean feat back in the day. But also, you had lived through many moons, as they say. There was experience. There was a wisdom that has to come with age. I am here speaking in a tried and trusted way. As you know, I am honoured to be Dr. Karen Ward, and I have an academic background, but I very much come to you with my holistic hat on. Body, mind, and soul. From years of experience and being on the cusp, as they say, of the third and, let's be honest, the last phase of my life. And I come to you stepping into what would be called my crone phase. Now, you probably know that in the lifespan of a woman, there are three classic phases: the maiden, the mother, and what's called the crone. And our menfolk have the boy, the father, and the sage. Now, you'll probably think, ooh, sage sounds so much nicer than crone. But we are very much reclaiming this term, crone. And ideally, we are feisty, we're full of the wisdom of our life experience, but we're also attuned to who we are and what really sustains us in life. Now, let me give you an example. I have two examples for you. I remember very clearly going to our local art house cinema. And there's a little bit of a cafe there. And seated opposite me was this woman. I'd say she was probably in her late 70s. And this woman was, to my eyes, mesmeric. My eyes were so drawn to her. And I realised she had on, it looked like flat boots, well-cut black trousers that fit her, that suited her, maybe a black polo neck. And then she had this flamboyant coloured scarf. And she had a beret on. And she had a big slick of red lipstick. There was a twinkle in her eye. And she and her friends were discussing some art house film they'd just been to. And you could see in their demeanour that there was a genuine interest in, what did you think of that film? And what about that angle? That they were really engaged in meaningful conversation, deep, meaningful conversation. And there was no hurry. There was no sense that somebody had to be somewhere or they had to rush off for childcare or back to work. It was a yes. And I remember looking over and I caught her eye and I smiled. And I like to think that she knew what I was pondering in my head. The second example I'd like to share with you is very, very smart. I happen to know two parents with small children who were run ragged, trying to literally put bread on the table. They were both working in full-time jobs, dropping the children off childcare. And at the weekend, really engaging with their children, playing, as you do. And the two of them were absolutely exhausted, as young parents often are. Of course, these were middle-aged parents, having children later in life. But they recognised that both their little ones, I think one was 5 and maybe one was 7, loved going to Granny's. Oh, Mummy, Granny plays such amazing games with us, and wait till I tell you what she did. And the daughter was quite curious because she thought, gosh, my mum is in her early 80s. There's no way she could be running around with the children. And they used to talk about chasing and Red Rover and Catch Me If You Can, these type of games that were very popular back in the day. So the curious mother, and I was her friend, we watched what the granny did. Absolutely ingenious. This woman in her 80s was so wise that she recognized that her energy levels had shifted from her earlier days. So she had to use her wisdom to play with her grandchildren and more than likely exhaust them so they slept very quickly when they went to bed that night for her. And she used to stand and she'd say, "Children, will we play chasing?" "Oh, yes, Granny, yes." And she'd say, "Right, now I'm going to get you to run over to that post over there and I'm going to count and we'll see who can get there the fastest. Okay?" "Yes, Granny." 1, 2, 3, and the children would race across the garden. And when they were out of earshot, she'd stop and she'd chat away with whoever was with her, blah, 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 blah. And the children would race all the way over to the red bush and then they'd stop and then they'd run back. And when they came into earshot, she'd go 18, 19, 20, well done. And so the children had fantastic fun with Granny and she didn't step from where she stood. Now there's two very examples, quite different. One is to do with the look and the demeanour and the culture and arts of the cinema, and the other one is to do with engaging with 2 generations down, but in a wise way of how she used her energy. And this is where we're coming from with Older, Wiser, Finer. In other words, whatever our age is, we embrace the aging process. We look after ourselves, but we recognize that with growing older comes the wisdom of experience and the finer things in life. Now, I want to return to the self-care. As you know, I'm wearing my holistic hat now. And it's important that we look after our body, our mind, and our soul. We can have the most amazing partners, the most fantastic parents, the most brilliant children, the friends that are second to none. But nobody can climb inside our head or our body and do it for us. We have to do it for ourselves. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be down the gym pumping iron every second night, unless you want to. It doesn't mean you have to be running marathons or, in the beauty salon every second day. No. It's about honouring this vessel that houses your Celtic soul. What you put into it, the food you eat, when you eat, what you drink, when you drink, how much you drink. Now, these are basic things, and we all know this. Personally, as I got older, I had to tweak, if you will, how I eat and what I drink. I've recognised that gone are the days where I could split a bottle of wine with my chap. Gone are the days when I could even think of a bottle of beer. They're long gone. So I savour very expensive whiskey, or I have really good quality gin in sparkling mineral water so I can actually taste the botanicals in the gym. Now, I don't drink copiously. I never really did, to be quite honest, but I'm conscious of sipping a small amount. I really like it. It's great. And it means I don't have a hangover the next day, which doesn't agree with me anymore. Hangovers. Did they ever? Probably not. The other thing is, and this was a huge tweak, I recognize that I can't actually eat after 7:30, 8 at night. If I do, it sits in my digestive system all evening, and it really affects my sleep and how I am the next morning. And lo and behold, when I did this, guess what? I actually dropped a few pounds. Happy days. Now, what I do mightn't suit you, but the invitation is for you to find out what suits you. I also discovered, who knew, that kimchi and sauerkraut, or kimchi comes from the Far East, sauerkraut, we know pickled cabbage from Germany, Eastern European states, they would have the equivalent of what the Irish would have had, buttermilk back in the day. So they're natural probiotics that certainly agree with my system. Mind-wise, I meditate twice a day. Now, I do it for probably 5 to 7 minutes in the morning and the evening. Works for me. If I don't do it, I really notice the difference. If I get a bit stressed during the day, I go into my yoga breathing and I practice yoga. I drink gallons of herbal tea, peppermint in particular. And it really suits me. And it means that I come into those finer years appreciating this vessel. And my invitation to you is to find out, what is it that suits you? And there's a lovely segue from the physical aspect into the mental and emotional. In my clinic, I frequently come across people, both men and women, and they might, I wish I could lose 10 pounds. I wish I could lose a couple of stone. And it seems to weigh very heavily on them. And I say to them, who's at home for you? And it might be a partner or a husband or a wife or a whoever. And I say, do they want you to lose weight? I don't think they really notice. So is it worth losing those few extra pounds so that you don't have to think about it or talk about it anymore? Or is it just accepting how you are now because they don't mind? Now, if there's a medical aspect, if you are at the obese stage and it's affecting yourself physically, well then that's a whole different ballgame. But I think we spend an inordinate amount of time in our head ruminating over things that we want to do and are not doing, rather than just doing them and getting them out of the way, or accepting them and forget about them. There's a lovely analogy that I often use, And I think of it in terms of an amazing woman here in these Celtic Isles who is the Cailleach. And here is her picture. So the Cailleach is an Irish deity. She's the crone goddess. And she represents the guide and the guardian for us in our elder years. And she embodies that feisty wildness, almost the bluntness that your granny can say things to you that your mother couldn't say. Or if she did, you'd take offence. Whereas granny says it, it's fine. You kind of go, should I cut my hair? Oh, okay, granny. And there's that sense of coming up through life and reaching a fork in the road at menopause. Now, some of you have heard me talk about this before. And over one side is all the regrets, and I should have, and I could have, and I wish I had. And over the other side is a very light, bright vibrancy. And when we come to menopause, not only do we women stop menstruating, in other words, the potential for birthing children has now come to a completion, but we still have the energetic capacity and potential to birth many things. And now we're beyond possibly childcare. We're beyond, we know who we are as much as we can do. Maybe we're getting ready to retire from a job, or we know it very well. So there's a huge opportunity to travel as much as we can, and that might be within the country that you live in, to explore hobbies that you didn't have time for early on, to really get to know yourself in a whole new way. And this is what the Cailleach does. She gives us that opportunity to be our guide and guardian. I have a couple of funny pictures for you that I really like. And this is the granny, and she's going to the dance class. I love it. Don't let anyone dull your sparkle. Ooh. And then this one, again, they're quite funny. But here's the older women friends, and they're out huffing it. They're on a girls' night out. Fantastic. It's up to us how we want to reinvent ourselves or invent our older years. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh yes, I'm knocking on the door of my perimenopausal maybe, or you're knocking on the door of the late 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. But some of you could be thinking, well, I'm only in my 40s. I don't have to worry about it. Well, let me tell you something. The real shifting point comes around 45. That's the tipping point. And that's when many women start their perimenopause. They notice that their cycle, their moon time, if you will, is slightly later than usual or longer than usual. There's a shift. And it's also when our energy levels begin to shift. Not to alarm us in any way, but to be wise about it. And it's often when, like me, and here's the example, someone who never wore glasses suddenly realized, I can't actually read small print anymore, so I need the help of glasses. It might be our hearing that's affected. It could be, yes, the ability to remember things as much as we used to. And if you think about it, if our brains are a little bit like computers, by the time we reach 45 and start heading towards our 50s, we have an awful lot of information stored up here. And like the computer, it's time to delete files that we don't need, particularly those that are old hurts, grievances, or things that we don't need anymore. Anything that brings up emotion, a wash of emotion in you, then they can be very much let go, released. And this is very much where we can ponder on our ancestors. For example, I recognize that in my parents, but particularly my grandparents, there were certain traits or characteristics that I recognize that I have carried on for them that are very special. My dad was a great dancer. My dad loved classical music. My granny was a fabulous crafter, really good at gardening. One of my grandfathers is an avid reader. Both my grandfathers, one was a captain in the army, one was a captain in the Garda Síochána. So they were very much, justice was important to them, keeping the peace was important to them, but order and practicality came into it. And both my grannies actually had a very strong intuitive streak. But I also recognize that while I am carrying those on, there were certain traits that I need to let go. My dad could be very short-tempered, cranky, blunt. My grandfather could be very very patriarchal, controlling. One of my grandmothers was very vain. One of them could slip into hopelessness. And they are traits that I am choosing to let go. With great respect for them, knowing that they lived different lives and there was a reason why all of those things happened. But I don't need to carry it on. And I certainly don't need to see passed down the next generation, in my case with my nieces and my nephews. That really is the older side of things, and I've talked earlier about the wiser. But let's finish up about the finer things in life. If I could tell you the amount of women and men who've sat in my clinic, taken the brave step to come into counselling, psychotherapy, or some energy therapy, different holistic therapies I've offered down the years, to explore what it is their heart yearns for. Because in the business of life, we often forget. And when we reach a certain age, or we're coming towards that, we have perspective on our lives. What do you want to do? Who do you want to be with? Where do you want to be? Do you want to keep living in the city, or is there an opportunity to move, downsize? If you didn't get to travel when you were younger, well, maybe you can do so now. Perhaps there's hobbies, perhaps there's interests that you never had a chance to pursue earlier on because there simply wasn't the money or the time, or maybe even the inclination then. But now, this is it. And there are plenty of people out there who are looking to connect with others, like-hearted folk, as I would call it. In other words, it doesn't have to be that if your friends that you hang around with at the moment, if they're not particularly keen on what you like, well then trust that there's plenty more people out there who would only be thrilled to do whatever it is. Learn, I don't know, dancing, strictly dancing. Yes, go for it. Perhaps it's, you've always wanted to be able to dressmake, whatever. This is a special time, and one that we, in this day and age, I would say have an opportunity, but even more so, I would say a responsibility to shift public perception so that our elder years, our older, wiser, finer years are to be looked forward to be relished, because we have our health, we have time, and most of us, thankfully, have a few bob in the bank. And it doesn't mean that we have to have lots of money, not at all, but it means that we aren't at that early stage of our life where we're trying to find out where we fit in, who we are, and establish ourselves. We know who we are now. as much as any human can be. And to relish that and to really explore and discover this whole new aspect of yourself. You're wiser, you're finer, the older you. Enjoy.